This episode is a short recorded conversation between me and my senior grad student, Andrew Kleinschmidt. So, Andrew, a couple of months ago, suffered a traumatic brain injury, and as part of his rehab, he was assigned a homework assignment to have an interview about fairly existential topics. And so he chose to interview me about the origin of my research topic, which is stretchable organic semiconductors, mechanical properties of organic semiconductors. And in the end of the conversation, we talk about legacy and what would happen if, if something bad happened, and whether or not we'd be okay with that. So hope you enjoy. I don't like the word stretchable electronics.
We'll get to that.
I think stretchable is kind of, are you pausing it?
What? No.
Oh. I think the word stretchable is a little bit silly, in part because it doesn't have a material science definition, also because it is used sometimes often incorrectly, because things that can be like a person in the Middle Ages in Italy who is espousing heresy would be stretched on the rack. Now they're stretchable, but not reversibly stretchable.
Right.
So I don't think stretchable is a great word scientifically. The reason that we want to understand the mechanical properties of these printed semiconductor materials for increased robustness, which may include large deformations of the stretchable modality, is because a lot of semiconductor devices are really brittle, and there are a lot of types of devices that we might want to make out of semiconductors that can't be done because the materials just can't be conformed. For example, a solar panel is really expensive because it is made of rigid silicon that have to be made in a highly serialized manner, like one cell at a time, that are assembled into panels. It would be much easier to print them like we print newspaper on rolls, and you can reduce the weight. That means you can also reduce what's called the balance of system costs, which means that it's cheaper to apply them to rooftops and road surfaces and parking garages and everything that we might want to put solar cells on. The other application area is in bioelectronics, where for a device to conform to the surface of the body or an internal organ, to measure some physiological quantity, it actually has to be conformable. The material has to stretch and conform.
Right. This is my question to get you say solar tarp somewhere. So imagine the thing that put you on the map in a big way, I'd say, was P3HBT. That was the first wow, this is both stretchable and semiconducting P3HBT. You could disagree with that assessment, and I welcome that disagreement. But what was the impetus behind P3HBT and trying to find it solar tarp?
Imagine that you could take all of the solar panels on a rooftop and ball them up the size of a grapefruit and unfurl it again to the size of a rooftop 1,000 times with no degradation in function. And imagine, one, how much you could reduce the cost of grid scale electricity if you had a material that was that thin and that robust, but also in applications in military and intelligence and disaster relief organizations, and also for off-grid applications for the developing world to run hot plates and lights without burning cow dung and unsustainably sourced biomass. And you wanted me to say solar tarp, so that is, you could call that a solar tarp, although this is probably thinner than a tarp that you might, put on the infield during a baseball game in a rain delay.
Right. Okay, fantastic. We've got some solar tarp in there. Now can we talk about the division between stretchable and hard polymer semiconductors? So polymers have very different properties. They can be stretchable, like a thin plastic bag, or stretchable by some definition of stretchable. They can be very, very hard. How have you been changing in your view towards mechanical properties of organic semiconductors?
Originally,
I know this answer.
Originally, we were motivated by the stretchable community.
Great.
There is a community of researchers interested in highly stretchable electronics that are based on spring-like structures embedded in rubber.
Okay.
And computer chips, basically, that are embedded in rubber that have like maybe a hard patch of rubber under the semiconductor chip so that it doesn't stretch as much as everything else. And these are like these highly physical engineering approaches at the at the millimeter and centimeter scale in order to ensure stretchability. I thought a good alternative approach was to make something that was intrinsically stretchable. And there are polymers that conduct charge, and a polymer is a plastic material like a plastic bag, or basically if you look around at anything in an indoor environment, pretty much everything is covered in polymers.
I'm going to put in brackets over where you said polymers, plastics.
Okay, polymers are plastics. And wouldn't it be cool, or wouldn't it solve all of these problems if you could take the semiconducting plastics that we have and turn them into semiconducting rubber, so that you could have a material that's stretched like a rubber band but have the same electronic properties as a silicon microchip in your smartphone. What was the second part of your question?
How have they changed? How have you gone more towards like hard polymer?
Yeah, okay. So a lot of the fun of this field for me has quite honestly been related to the lexicon because I am someone who really likes words and descriptions of things. And there's a conflation in the literature between hard and brittle, which is not a fair comparison to make. There are structures that are like a hockey puck is hard, but it is not brittle.
Right.
A hockey puck is strong and tough and has a lot of resistance to abrasion and indentation. Again, not brittle. Same thing with a like a tire. And I thought, well, it's the only Nixon could go to China argument.
Yes.
Where I had spent the first 5 years of my 7 years of my independent career talking about how we needed to have softer organic semiconductors, conductive plastic materials. And but then if you zoom out and look at all of the possible applications one might have for semiconducting plastic materials, there are many more applications that require strength, hardness, and resilience. And by resilience, I mean they take a lot of energy to stretch, but they always go back to their original shape. Think about road surfaces. It turns out that if you could pave all of the numbered highways in the United States with 10% efficient solar material, you would account for all of the energy used in America. That is real. That's a real calculation.
Solar roads, they're the future.
Or even like solar, like tunnels, like,
Yes.
Tents, like even in, just the amount of space that we devote to cars. Because rooftops alone aren't going to do it. Believe it or not, if you take all the highways, it's about 10 times more area than all the area of all the rooftops.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah. Think about all of the rural areas where you have roads that maybe one car goes down, and it's a numbered part of that state's numbered highway system. But what do those applications have? And even like flooring tiles, and sidewalk surfaces, all of these applications that are under quite intense mechanical insults, and they don't require stretchability, they require strength, hardness, and mechanical resilience. So there is some stretchable, deformable component, but it's about the way that the material accommodates that mechanical damage, and that's what I'm trying to like reframe in our discussion of this. So people might see it as being like,
hard.
Yeah, like
I'm solar cells.
like I'm being an apostate to the stretchable community by saying, no, you got it all wrong. We need hard materials, but it's actually a subtle and fairly more inclusive point that I'm trying to make.
Right, and hard polymer solar cells will presumably still be different from silicon solar cells in some way because
they're still ink-like, you can still process them. Picture how hard and resilient car paint is, or nail polish, or laminate flooring, and imagine that it was now generating electricity. Was that the last question that you had?
The last main question, to wrap up, how would you like your legacy in science to be viewed? How, at the end of your career, what would you like to be able to look back and say?
At the end of my career, what would I like to look back and say?
I have a lot of questions about mortality because
I have a few things. Sometimes I picture this as though if I were ever elected to the National Academy of Engineering, what would it be for?
Right.
I think that if polymer-based electronics ever become a thing more than they are now, right now the commercial uses of conductive plastic materials are limited to like anti-static coatings, but if they ever became broadly applicable in OLED displays, very similar technology but not based on plastic materials almost, or polymer solar cells, I would like to say that some work that we did in understanding the way in which the molecular structure influences the solid structure of the way that those structures influence the mechanical properties was important in some large-scale implementation of lighting, solar energy, or biosensors, and that would be a sufficient. That would be a sufficient scientific contribution. Another scientific contribution related to another area in our research lab, which is, I think that human beings have sensory systems that rival scientific instruments, and I would love to be able to say that you can learn something about the molecular structure of a material by touching it, by looking at it, and smelling it. Uses of the human peripheral nervous system as a means of understanding the natural world, but mediated by hardcore theories of how soft structures interact with materials, like how do fingertips interact with materials, and if you get some conscious output from a human participant in an experiment, that you could actually use that qualitative cognitive experience and translate that into a material property in a non-trivial way. Of course, a hockey puck is harder than a piece of like silicone rubber, but more subtle differences than that. The third thing is my legacy in education and mentorship. I want everyone to know that it is possible to have a really supportive environment and where students can get literally whatever job they want afterwards in a way that didn't grind them to dust in the process.
Didn't destroy them.
Yeah.
Your goal is to not kill the students.
And
almost failed, but you did it.
Yeah, although you were not engaged in a lab. I didn't have to drive you to the emergency room. The helicopter sort of did that, and it didn't happen in the lab. But to be completely like serious about this, I think that the students that have graduated from the lab or will graduate in the next 1 to 2 years, that's enough for me. If I got hit by a bus like tomorrow and died, and none of this close call stuff, if I actually died, I would be okay with that. I have had a big enough impact through my teaching and mentorship, and more so, I think, than the actual scientific output. But I could be okay with that. I could lose this job tomorrow. Hopefully, I would still have my pension. But which won't mature, for another 23 years. But
you can answer this or not, just to humanize you. How would you like your legacy as a person to be perceived? You cannot answer this.
Largely in a similar manner to my legacy as a professional, because the professional aspect of the professional aspect of my job is closely associated with the interpersonal aspect of my job. But I want to be able to get I want the honor of having students like you in the lab who come in with a lot of enthusiasm and ability, and to add something to their abilities through my perspective or experience that they would not have been able to get on their own or somewhere else. And if those people go on to do something that is fulfilling personally and professionally, then that's my job. And I would say the same thing about my this is going to sound absurd, but I have a 2-year-old daughter at home, and I would say the same thing about her too. Okay. That she, except that my role there is obviously as parent as opposed to professor. But she's going to come in. She's coming into this world with some set of abilities and experiences that she'll have. But I want her to have some interaction with me that makes her better off than she would have been, with a random, with a random person.